I still recall every detail of the day the world ended. The war with the humans was the longest and most bitter we had ever fought. By the time it was over, our fleets were decimated, and half our colonies lay in ruins. If you are new here, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and hit that alien-like button. Let's get started. On our homeworld, Tyrax, we were sheltered from the battles which always occurred far away. We noticed trade with outer colonies dwindling and received condolence messages for fallen soldiers. But this was the norm for us. We were a martial people, confident that the war would always be distant. Despite the declining trade and the increasing number of grieving families, we never considered the possibility of defeat. In tough times, Tyraxians thrived. If the enemy struck hard, we would strike back twice as hard, making victory even sweeter. Surrender was unthinkable, especially to humans. So, when our government announced that we were surrendering, the shock was immense. At first, everyone thought it was a mistake, a typo, or a communications sabotage by humans. However, more confirmations followed, and we could no longer deny the truth. Our government had concluded that we had lost the war and had no choice but to surrender. The announcement of our surrender left us in a state of disbelief. Everyone's first reaction was denial. It had to be a mistake, a worst-case scenario accidentally broadcast, or human sabotage. But as more confirmations arrived, we couldn't ignore the truth. Our government had decided we lost the war and must surrender to the humans. The following hours were surreal, almost dreamlike. Life on Tyrax came to a halt. People stopped working, schools were empty, and many wandered the streets in a daze, unsure of what to do. We had never surrendered before, not in 1,000 years and countless wars. Our military was the best in the galaxy, and we had started the conflict with humans so confidently. Our first attack had decimated an entire human fleet, and we overran their nearest colonies before they could regroup. We had every strategic advantage. Moreover, humans were our mortal enemies, their colonies encroaching on our territory, their weapons supplied to our foes. They were a ruthless species, taking anything they could and murdering those who resisted. The idea of surrendering to them was unthinkable, and yet it was happening. As the reality sank in, fear gripped us. We knew what human occupation meant, and the government spoke of their imminent arrival. As the truth set in, fear took hold. The government announced the imminent arrival of human occupation forces, and we all knew what that meant. Stories from our colonies spoke of mass executions, forced labor, daily beatings, and torture. Some chose suicide over the horrors they believed awaited us. The government discouraged such actions, urging us to endure for the sake of future generations. Most complied, though some questioned why we should follow a government that had surrendered. Across Tyrax, there was a sense of unraveling. Sporadic protests erupted, demanding we continue the war at any cost. Loyal troops, stationed at key points by the foresighted government, quickly suppressed the most serious disturbances. The rest fizzled out as people saw no one joining them. The majority of the population was too stunned to react. We could only sit and wait for the humans to arrive. About a month after the proclamation, the day the world ended arrived. The government withheld information, perhaps to prevent panic. Then, one evening, it was announced that the human fleet would arrive in orbit the next day. There was no panic, only resignation. If this was the end, we would meet it bravely, as Tyraxians always did. The day the human fleet arrived in orbit around Tyrax, there was no panic, only a somber acceptance. Many said goodbye to their loved ones, then isolated themselves, contemplating their lives before the human forces landed. Some watched through telescopes as the human battleships, though not larger than ours, appeared in overwhelming numbers, more than double our largest fleet. The official surrender took place in the empty fighter bay of the human flagship and was broadcast live across Tyrax. We expected to see our leaders humiliated, forced to apologize, and swear fealty to the humans. Instead, they were handed a pen to sign a parchment, a list of surrender terms. This simple act marked the end of our resistance. The ceremony was far less elaborate than we anticipated. After signing, our leaders gave a brief oath of fidelity and apology. There were no executions, no torture. This unexpected leniency gave some of us a glimmer of hope, but most held their breath, waiting for the humans to reveal their true intentions. Within hours, human dropships began landing, and occupation forces moved to take control. I debated whether to hide or watch from my window. Curiosity won, and I saw the imposing human tanks, armoured carriers, and ranks of powered infantry march through our streets. Watching from my window, I saw the human occupation forces take control of our city. First came the tanks, hovering just above the street on suspensor fields, twice as heavy as anything we could build. Then came the armoured personnel carriers, followed by ranks of powered infantry, fully enclosed in armour, almost like walking tanks. As I observed, I realized we had never truly understood what we were fighting. My neighbours, also peering out from their windows, seemed equally awed. Our confidence in our military had blinded us to the true nature of our enemies. We had been arrogant and ignorant. In the midst of my reflections, I saw a young child wander into the path of the advancing troops. I expected the worst, but instead, one of the soldiers gently picked her up, carried her back to safety, and even gave her food. This unexpected act of kindness left me questioning everything I had been told about the humans. It became clear that the humans were not the monsters we had feared. Their behavior suggested they were more complex than we had imagined. This single act hinted that our future under human occupation might not be as dire as we had believed. It offered a glimmer of hope amidst our despair. As the occupation forces took control of Tyrax, a sense of uneasy calm settled over the city. I debated whether to stay hidden or face the reality of our new rulers. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured out, careful to avoid attracting attention. The human troops were efficient and disciplined. They set up checkpoints, secured government buildings, and patrolled the streets. To my surprise, they did not exhibit the brutality we had feared. There were no random acts of violence, no public executions. Instead, the occupation seemed almost orderly. The day after the surrender, I reported to work as usual, unsure of what to expect. Passing through security checkpoints, I feared arrest or worse. However, my manager instructed me to continue my tasks as normal. Later, we were summoned to a briefing by a human official. The human Doug introduced himself as our new supervisor. He explained the new guidelines and standards we would follow under the occupation government. There was no mention of purges or punishments. Instead, he spoke of cooperation and rebuilding Tyrax into a prosperous society. Slowly, we began to adjust to the new normal. The initial fear began to dissipate, replaced by cautious hope. The humans' behavior suggested that perhaps our worst fears were unfounded. Over the next few weeks, life on Tyrax slowly adapted to the presence of the human occupation forces. The initial fear and uncertainty began to fade as it became clear that the humans were not as brutal as we had feared. There were no mass purges, no forced labor camps. Instead, they seemed focused on maintaining order and stability. The humans set up checkpoints and patrols, but they did so with surprising efficiency and minimal disruption. I continued to go to work, passing through these checkpoints, and found that my daily routine was largely unchanged. Doug, our human supervisor, turned out to be fair and competent. He introduced new guidelines and standards, but they were clear and reasonable. As I interacted more with the human officials, I began to see them as individuals rather than faceless occupiers. They were not the monsters we had been led to believe. Many of them were even friendly and respectful. This unexpected behavior slowly chipped away at my ingrained prejudices. Despite the occupation, there was a sense of normalcy returning to our lives. We still mourned our losses and struggled with the reality of defeat, but the fear of brutal oppression gradually lessened. The humans' conduct suggested that perhaps there was a chance for a more peaceful coexistence than we had anticipated. As weeks passed under human occupation, we began to reflect on our previous misconceptions. The humans had not enforced a reign of terror as we had feared. Instead, they were maintaining order with surprising restraint. There were arrests and trials for specific crimes committed during the war, but these were few and seemed justified based on the evidence presented. Our daily lives continued with an unexpected normalcy. Doug, our human supervisor, was efficient and even amiable. He treated us with more respect than our own leaders had. This growing familiarity with the humans revealed their complexity. They were not the ruthless conquerors we had imagined, but individuals capable of empathy and fairness. As we adapted, I realized that our defeat was not due to betrayal or a dirty trick. It was our arrogance and ignorance that had led us here. We had underestimated the humans and overestimated our own capabilities. This painful realization brought a sense of humility. The day the humans arrived was supposed to be the end, but it felt more like a new beginning. We began to see that working with the humans might offer a chance to rebuild and perhaps create a better future. The old Tyrax was gone, but a new one was emerging from the ashes of our pride. Over time, our interactions with the humans became more personal. Doug, our supervisor, was not just a competent leader, but also a considerate individual. I even began to call him a friend. This was a sentiment shared by many of my colleagues. The humans we worked with were respectful and, at times, even kind. Admitting our defeat was hard. The war had cost millions of lives, left countless devastated, and caused immense hardship. It was difficult to accept that it had all been for nothing, driven by imperialistic greed and arrogance. Yet the evidence of our folly surrounded us daily. The humans were not the monsters we had been led to believe. They were efficient, fair, and surprisingly empathetic. This new reality forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about them. The surrender day, which we had feared was the end, turned out to be the beginning of a new chapter. Life under occupation was not the brutal oppression we had anticipated. Instead, it was a time of rebuilding and rethinking. We started to see the potential for a better future, one built on cooperation rather than conflict. The old Tyrax had ended, but a new one, with humans, was slowly emerging. Reflecting on our time under human occupation, it became clear that our defeat had been a humbling but transformative experience. The humans, once feared as ruthless conquerors, had proven to be fair and even compassionate rulers. Their efficiency and respect for order had brought stability to Tyrax. The initial fear and resistance had given way to a cautious optimism. Life continued with surprising normalcy, and the humans' conduct suggested a future built on cooperation rather than oppression. The old Tyraxian pride had crumbled, but from its ruins, a new sense of community and resilience began to grow. Our interactions with humans revealed their complexity and capacity for empathy. They were not the monsters we had imagined, but individuals capable of kindness and understanding. This realization forced us to reevaluate our perceptions and embrace the possibility of a peaceful coexistence. As we moved forward, the hope of rebuilding Tyrax with humans grew stronger. The end of the war marked not the demise of our world, but the beginning of a new era. Together, we envisioned a future where Tyraxians and humans could work side by side, creating a prosperous and harmonious society. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, we felt that it was worth seeing where it would lead. The day we surrendered was not the end, but a new beginning, full of potential and hope. In the beginning, our fear of human occupation was overwhelming. We anticipated brutal oppression, mass executions, and daily terror. Stories from the outer colonies painted a picture of relentless cruelty. However, as the weeks turned into months, reality proved different. The humans were strict but not cruel. They enforced order, set up checkpoints, and maintained security. But there were no widespread acts of violence or random killings. Instead, their presence brought about a strange sense of stability. We realized that many of our fears were unfounded. Our initial terror gave way to a cautious acceptance. The humans were not the monsters we had been led to believe. They were efficient, fair, and even empathetic. The trials for war crimes were few and justified, focusing on those who had committed specific atrocities. This new understanding shifted our perspective. The day the humans arrived, which we had dreaded as the end, turned out to be the beginning of a new chapter. We began to see the potential for rebuilding and coexistence. The old Tyrax was gone, but a new one was emerging, shaped by the lessons of our past and the realities of our present. The journey was still challenging, but with each passing day, the hope for a better future grew stronger. The fear that once paralyzed us slowly transformed into a determination to create something better alongside our former enemies. The weeks under human occupation turned into months, and the initial shock began to fade. We adapted to the new order imposed by the humans, finding a strange sense of stability in their efficient governance. The feared brutality never materialized. Instead, there was a surprising normalcy. I continued to work under Doug, our human supervisor. He was fair, competent, and surprisingly considerate. His behavior, and that of other human officials, challenged our preconceptions. They treated us with respect, more so than our previous leaders. A growing understanding between humans and us was evident during this period of adaptation. We began to see them as individuals, capable of empathy and kindness. The fear of relentless oppression gave way to cautious optimism. We realized that cooperation could lead to a more prosperous future. Our daily routines resumed with a sense of normalcy we had not expected. The initial terror of occupation was replaced by a pragmatic acceptance. The humans' actions suggested a genuine interest in maintaining order and rebuilding our society. Reflecting on our arrogance and ignorance, we understood that our defeat was not due to a trick, but our own overconfidence. The end of the war marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could rebuild and perhaps thrive alongside humans. As months passed, our interactions with the humans grew more personal. I developed a genuine friendship with Doug, my supervisor. He was not just efficient, but also kind and considerate. This sentiment was shared by many of my colleagues, who found that their human counterparts were respectful and even warm. Admitting the futility of the war was difficult. The conflict had claimed millions of lives and caused widespread devastation. It was difficult to accept that our own arrogance had been the driving force behind it. Yet, as we interacted with humans, it became clear that our previous beliefs were misguided. The humans were not the ruthless conquerors we had imagined. They were complex, empathetic, and capable of forming genuine connections. This realization forced us to re-evaluate our perspectives and embrace the possibility of a peaceful future together. Our daily lives continued with a sense of normalcy we had not expected. The initial terror and resistance gave way to a cautious optimism. The humans' behavior suggested a future built on cooperation rather than oppression. The old Tyraxian pride had been humbled, but from its ruins, a new sense of community and resilience emerged. The war had ended, but it had also paved the way for a new beginning. Together with humans, we could rebuild and create a better future. Reflecting on our old ways, it was clear that our arrogance and ignorance had led to our downfall. The war had been fueled by our belief in our invincibility and the perception of humans as lesser beings. This overconfidence had blinded us to the reality of our own vulnerabilities. The human occupation revealed a different side to our conquerors. They were not the ruthless oppressors we had imagined. Instead, they were disciplined, fair, and even compassionate. This forced us to confront the flaws in our own society and the misguided beliefs that had driven us to war. The old Tyrax was characterized by a rigid sense of pride and superiority. The defeat shattered these illusions, paving the way for a more humble and cooperative approach. The humans, once our enemies, became partners in rebuilding our world. Their efficiency and respect for order helped stabilize our society, creating a foundation for a more prosperous future. As we moved forward, the lessons of the past guided us. We recognized the importance of humility, empathy, and cooperation. The war had been a harsh teacher, but it had also opened our eyes to the potential for a better future. Together with humans, we began to rebuild, hoping to create a society built on mutual respect and shared goals. The end of the war marked the beginning of a new chapter for Tyrax. The occupation, once feared as a time of brutal oppression, had become a period of rebuilding and reflection. The humans, initially seen as ruthless conquerors, proved to be fair and efficient rulers. Their presence brought stability and order, allowing us to envision a better future. Our interactions with humans revealed their complexity and capacity for empathy. They were not the monsters we had imagined, but individuals capable of kindness and understanding. This realization forced us to re-evaluate our perceptions and embrace the possibility of a peaceful coexistence. The war had shattered our old ways, but from the ruins, a new sense of community and resilience emerged. The humans' behavior suggested that cooperation, not conflict, could lead to prosperity. Together, we began to rebuild Tyrax, laying the foundations for a society based on mutual respect and shared goals. As we looked to the future, we carried the lessons of the past with us. The war had been a harsh teacher, but it had also opened our eyes to the potential for growth and understanding. With humans as partners, we hope to create a new era of peace and cooperation, building a world where Tyraxians and humans could thrive together. The journey ahead was challenging, but with each step, the hope for a brighter future grew stronger. The day we surrendered was not the end, but a new beginning, full of potential and hope.